Target is 4 clicks out. Continue with extreme caution. Copy that. Temporal disturbances. Negative Viper 1. Scopes are clear. We're still monitoring the situation in real time. Copy, Overlord. Proceeding with takedown. I turned my crew as we flew over the Gallatin National Forest in the Black Hawk. Its engines shook the air inside as it carried us over the trees. Alright, I said through the headset to the team. Operation Lambda is a go, I said, receiving a series of acknowledging nods from the rest of them. Over the drop-off point in 60 seconds, lights out, the pilot said over the radio as the chopper started to circle over the LZ. Suddenly, the red lights inside turned off, leaving the only illumination to the last sliver of sunlight dropping off over the eastern horizon. With that, we dropped down and activated our night vision goggles. As the chopper hovered over the drop point, we lowered our ropes and descended down to the forest floor, taking position around each other in a circle as we secured the LZ. Viper 4 clear, Viper 2 clear, Viper 5 clear, Viper 3 clear, Viper 1 clear, I replied to the rest of the team as I scanned the area with my rifle. The target is 2 clicks west from our position. Viper 2, take point. Roger that, Viper 2 replied. Move out. Slowly, we began to methodically maneuver our way through the forest, making sure to check every inch of our route for any type of temporal anomalies caused by the target. Other than the occasional cracking of twigs, the only sounds were that of the wild nightlife. Captain, Viper 2 said through the radio, I've got something here. While the squad halted and held position, I made my way to the front to inspect what had been found. Viper 2 was in front of a small stream flowing downwards from the hill. The flashlight attached to his rifle was aiming down at the stream. I got an anomaly, small but definitely residue from the target, he said as I came up behind him. Sure enough, he had found one. While the stream itself was flowing in the correct direction, there was still something extremely wrong with it. Thousands of tiny bubbles were popping and fizzing out of it, as if all the water flowing within was carbonated. The targets that you will be hunting are not of this world, or even this dimension, our instructor had said. The realms they come from may have completely different laws of physics, separate from our own universe. So, as they pass through our reality, the two begin to contradict one another. This causes anomalies both trans-dimensional and temporal in nature. According to Command, these intruders had been coming through to our reality ever since the early 1940s. Something about the commencement of humanity's experiments with atomic weapons had thinned the lining of the dimensional barriers surrounding the Earth, allowing other beings to occasionally pass through. In 1952, the United States government created Task Force 51 to track down the intruders and terminate them before the anomalies following in their wake brought down irreversible damage to the time-space continuum. It was my job, our job to ensure the safety of the human race. Overlord, come in. I radioed in. We read you, Viper 1. We have a Class 7 spatial anomaly. Local environmental assets have been affected. Copy, Viper 1. We see your helmet cam. Marking your position for cleanup crews. Proceed to the target with caution. Copy, Overlord. Viper 1 out. With that, we continued on through the forest. About half a click away from the target, the air around us was suddenly filled with the screams of what appeared to be a deer. It howled and yelped until violently ending in one last blood-curdling cry. The entire squad snapped into position without a word. That came from the west. Viper 2 said over the comms. Most likely caused by the target. Agreed, I replied. Hey Cap, do you hear that? Viper 4 asked. Hear what? I asked, turning my head towards him. Exactly, he whispered. There's nothing. It took me a moment to realize, but he was right. There wasn't a single sound throughout the entire forest. Not an insect, not a bird, nothing. There was complete and absolute silence. My heart nearly stopped when the voice of Overlord sliced through the silence in the radio. Viper 1, come in. This is Viper 1, I said, catching my breath. Go ahead. We detected a Class 1 temp. Suddenly, a wave of static washed over the comms, blocking out our communications. Overlord, come in. Static. Overlord. From Dallas, Texas, the flash apparently official. President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, was the only thing coming out from our Overlord's frequency now. With that, we all began to look at one another, oblivious as to what was going on. It must be a temporal anomaly, Viper 2 said, cutting off his outer comms. Agreed, I said. We're on our own. Keep an eye out. Quietly, the rest of my team began to move once again. We're in the dark now. As we moved closer to the target's last recorded position, we began picking up more strange broadcasts from the Overlord's frequency. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight in the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. NBC can now confirm that a second plane has hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. We have unconfirmed reports of nuclear detonations in Los Angeles and Seattle. With the final transmission, the frequency went static once more. Cut the channel, I said. Nothing more than an anomaly at this point. And with that, the comms are silent. The team halted as Viper 2 stopped up ahead of us and raised a fist. Captain, he said, eyes on the target. Everyone remained in place as I slowly made my way up the hill to confirm the sighting. On the other end of the hill, there was a small clearing in the forest with a single log cabin in the middle. Faint yellow lights protrude from the smeared windows as a steady stream of smoke flowed from the chimney above. This was it. According to the reconnaissance information from the area, we have confirmed that this section of Gallatin National Forest has been cleared of any and all foliage. The Overlord had said during our briefing before our deployment to Montana. A large tactical overhead map of the region was projected along the wall of the hangar, showing a circular section of the forest completely empty, except for a single object in the center. It is to our understanding that a lone structure resembling a log cabin is now the only thing in the entire clearing. This was not there 7 hours ago. We had seen examples before of intruders forging refuges for themselves, which meant that this would be an even more difficult assignment, given that now it was obvious that the entire surrounding area had been exposed to high amounts of Class 1 temporal spatial anomalies. Slowly, the team began to circle the small cabin with their weapons trained. Viper 4, prepare to breach. Copy. Viper 4 then began to make his way to the entrance of the cabin and placed a breaching charge on the wooden door. Windows. Nothing showing up on thermal. Viper 3 replied. Viper 3, 2 and 5. When I give the order, open fire through the windows. Danger close. Copy. And with that, I made my way behind Viper 4 and placed a hand on his shoulder. Engage. Suddenly, a barrage of gunfire erupted around the trees and at the cabin's windows, as the rest of the team emptied their loaded clips. At the exact moment the firing had ceased, I gave the final order. Breach and clear. The charge on the door then detonated, hurling burning splinters outwards at Viper 4 and myself as we entered the cabin. However, once we had cleared the threshold of the cabin, we entered what seemed to be an abandoned, dilapidated mansion. "What the hell?" Viper 4 said. "Cut the chatter. Squad, regroup on me. We have a situation." Within moments, everyone else had gathered around the entrance to the cabin. "What's the situation?" Viper 2 asked. "The cabin appears to be dimensionally transcendental. It seems that the interior is modeled after an old manor-styled estate." "Crap," Viper 3 replied. "This isn't going to be an easy one." "Agreed," I said, stepping back inside. "Then again, we don't get paid for easy." Inside, the mansion seemed to be laid out in 2 levels. A few steps in, a large staircase divided 2 separate hallways heading left and right. "How you want to take this, Captain?" Viper 5 asked. 2 and 3, check the upstairs. 4, you check the downstairs with me. 5, wait outside and check the area. If radios go silent for a full hour, retreat to a secure location and call in the drone strike. Asset denial is our main priority." "Copy that," Viper 5 said, stepping outside. Suddenly, the sound of music from a piano began to pour down from the upper level of the mansion. "Beethoven," Viper 3 said curiously. We all then turned our head towards him for a moment, surprised. This only seemed to warrant a shrug from him. When then all of us looked upwards towards the music. "On me," I said, slowly making my way up the stairs with my rifle trained on the source. The rest of the team, except for 5, moved on with me, abandoning our former plan given the certain circumstances that had presented themselves. As we made our way up, the continuous melody of music drowned out the creaking wooden steps beneath us. When we had reached the 2nd level, the dark hallways stretched out to either side of us as the candles along the walls began to glow to life, as their flames began to slowly ignite themselves. After a few moments, it became clear that the night vision was going to be nothing more than a hindrance at this point. "Goggles off, everyone," I said as I slid mine up off onto my helmet. The rest of the squad quickly followed. "Music seems to be coming from there," Viper 3 said, as he trained his rifle on the door at the far side of the hallway on the left. Without a word, we made our way to the door, stacking up behind it. Slowly, Viper 3 reached out to the door handle and turned it slightly. "Unlocked," he whispered. I then tapped his shoulder 3 times, giving him the signal to open and breach. Like clockwork, he slid the door open as we all piled in, training our weapons at every corner of the room. Inside was a large study, with a crackling fireplace at the far side of the room. A large black grand piano stood over a red carpet at the center. It continued to spout out music, without anyone or anything playing its keys. "Clear," I said after lowering my weapon. "Target is not in sight." As we began to survey the room, looking for any further clues as to the whereabouts of the target, Viper 3 began to walk over to the autonomous piano. He seemed almost mesmerized by it, as he reached out his hands to touch one of the keys. As he did, a series of serrated teeth pierced through the fallboard as it suddenly bit down on his hand, amputating it from his wrist. He let out a pained cry as blood sprayed from his arm. Without hesitation, we opened fire on the piano, shredding it into thousands of tiny wooden splinters as an inhuman screech filled the air of the room. When the room was silent, Viper 2 went down to check on 3, who was now laying on the floor with a small pool of blood building up beside him. "It bit clean through the bone," he said, wrapping his arm in a turnbuckle. He then looked up at me. "We need to get him out of here, and fast." "What the heck was that?" 3 asked, biting down on his teeth. "I've never seen an intruder look, well, like that," Viper 4 said, walking over to the ruins of the piano with his rifle trained on it. and then a loud, wooden growl started to reverberate across the entire floor. Before I could even say anything, the floorboards beneath 2 and 3 broke apart, as a massive hand formed by broken pieces of the floor, along with wires and insulation, enveloped them. In an instant, the amalgamated hand squeezed them both into globs of exploding blood and organs. The hand then retreated back into the floor, leaving no fragments that it had ever been there, except for the unrecognizable remains of my 2 team members. "What the hell?" Viper 4 shouted, backing away. "The target isn't in the house," I whispered. "It is the house." "There is no escape," the disembodied voices of 2 and 3 said. As I looked up to see where the voices were coming from, I saw both of their heads mounted over the fireplace. Their eyes were black as sin, and their mouths were contorted and twisted into sinister smiles. "What's that saying?" they said together. "The house always wins." Viper 4 and I trained our rifles on the 2 heads, still smiling down at us. "I shall build my foundation upon your bones. Your soul shall rot in the vestibule of torment, and you shall perish as all have before. Ooh, Discordia," they cried out, laughing. With a natural reflex, 4 and I unloaded more ammunition into the heads, cackling over the fireplace. They immediately went silent. The entire interior of the house then began to creak. "Run," I shouted as I made my way out of the study. Just as 4 got out, the ceiling collapsed into piles of wood, concrete, and a waterfall of thick red spews of blood. The entire hallway leading down to the stairway screamed in protest, as howling cracks exploding around us, erupting into a chorus of insane and human voices. As we made our way towards the stairs, I looked back down the hallway that we had just come from. At the far end where the study had once been, a massive vase made of broken wood and porcelain was pushing its way towards us. "Get down there now," I yelled as I emptied the rest of my magazine into the encroaching head, getting closer and closer with each chop of its serrated, splintered mouth. I then rolled down the stairs as another amalgamated hand shot through the other hallway in an attempt to grab me. The first floor of the mansion began to twist and contort its dimensions, trying to keep us from the door as the giant head blasted through the hallway, growing in size as it began to connect itself with the splintered hand in some unimaginable contorted abdominal form. With a final sprint to the door, I tossed an active grenade behind me, jumping out of the threshold, landing hard on the ground outside in the forest clearing. A barrage of gunfire momentarily disoriented me as I sat back up, when I realized that it was coming from Viper 5, who was higher up on the edge of the tree line. I backed myself up, loading another magazine into my rifle and joining in on the combat. Through the exterior of the tiny log cabin that housed the internal chaos, I witnessed my grenade detonate. The explosion reverberated to the roof of the cabin as a massive ball of fire erupted from the roof. As the fire faded away, the interior dimensions of the cabin began to leak out into our external reality in a wave of indescribable, ever-changing alien geometry. The internal living dimension floated up into the sky, as if in zero gravity. It screamed in defilement of our universe's laws of physics, as the ground around the cabin began to vibrate. I knew what this was. It was going to try to go back through the walls of reality to whatever hellscape it had come from, and it was trying to take us with it. "Call it in," I screamed to Viper 5. "Call it in now." Without hesitation, 5 pulled out the flare gun from his holster and fired it into the sky. The purple flare shot up about 200 feet into the sky, before popping like a firework high above the forest. I knew now that it would only be moments until the drone flying high above opened fire on our location. Danger close, danger close. Mustering what little energy I had, I pulled Ford to his feet and helped him run as far as we possibly could. After a few hundred feet, however, the ground began to buckle and wave like an ocean during a storm. As we fell to our feet, we looked back towards the cabin. The now unrecognizable log house was twisting and floating about 50 feet above the ground. The air around it shimmered and vibrated in waves as the dimensional barriers of the cabin continued to leak outwards. For a moment, I thought that this was it, that after nearly 30 years of service, it would all end here. And then from up above, a faint whistle could be heard coming closer and closer. A moment later, I could see the faint, glowing tail of the drone's missile descending down with its ferocious intent. As it impacted the cabin, it exploded into a purplish-blue inferno as it consumed the entire dimensional anomaly. With one last protesting howl, the explosion then imploded in on itself with one victorious boom that nearly ruptured my eardrums. It was all over in a matter of seconds. Viper 4 and I sat in the clearing for a few minutes in complete silence as we awaited extraction. I had seen things that defied logic, killed beings that would drive a normal man insane just by a glimpse of its skin. But this was unlike anything I had ever encountered. But I was sure of one thing: it would be the last. I retired from the task force after that and moved down to Florida, where I've been a volunteer at the local VA for the past few years. I feel like the only way I can try to reconcile the things I've seen was to help other veterans who have seen the hells of combat themselves. But no matter how much I do, no matter how much I try, the twisted voice of my fallen team still creeps into my nightmares every night, always whispering back to me, "The house always wins."